What is up, everyone? This is Soul, and in about 24 to 26 hours, it's going to be BlizzCon. We're going to be starting opening ceremonies. I'm going to be live being like, wow, oh my gosh, unless I'm struggling with getting the stream started. Uh, and we're going to learn a lot during opening ceremony, during the What's Next panel, during the deep dive and everything. And what I wanted to do today, a couple of days before the convention, I'm just doing this recording early, is I wanted to, I guess, make some requests or just kind of talk about things that I really, really hope will come to World of Warcraft, that get announced either immediately or in some sort of later interview or something like that. This is a little bit different from like the predictions or whatnot. These are more like one part expectations, one part, oh my god, they better do this, because these are things that I'm going to talk about that I feel like the game really needs in order to not be successful or to be good, but just it's just going to be good for the game overall. As to if you could bear with the ranting, I'd really appreciate it. Of course, if you don't mind, like the video, subscribe for more stuff. I have a short list of five things that I'm going to be talking about that are very important. I will do my best to be brief, despite my bloviating. And the first thing that I wanted to mention is the game could really use a fix to leveling. Leveling sucks. The the things that the WoW team has been doing to try and I guess repair it or to make the experience a little bit more palatable for folks via Chromie time, it was a solution for like the moment. They wanted to take those expansions and try to, I guess, split them off into different experience chunks that let people choose their own expansion, choose their own experience. And I think in hindsight, and maybe even before, I'm sure people were saying it before, it's pretty jank. It's not a great experience. I don't find that to be the kind of cohesive storytelling that an MMORPG ought to be. It felt like Chromie Time was more for the veterans than for new players, and what this game could really use, especially when it's coming on its 20th anniversary, is a brand new way to experience this, the initial, like, what is Warcraft? Because we've seen from, or at least I've read from, there was some interview where one of the game directors, one of the three daddies of WoW, had said, the new starting experience for brand new players is going to be Dragonflight. It's going to be the new first time experience. And the thought that comes to my head is, well, is that like, maybe it's a good system experience, maybe it's a good way to introduce the player to like what's current and what's new, but does it really tell the player what is Warcraft? Does it tell the story of maybe the characters that they might have like heard about from the RTS games or earlier expansions in WoW, and we're not seeing much of any of that in Dragonflight? So is that like a really good first step forward? And I want to say no, it's not, because I feel like once that person completes that experience, they're going to, I mean, that's how it's kind of been even with BFA. You experience the world one way, and then you're thrust into something else entirely. And then you're opted to jump into like these little islands or expansions that are totally different experiences that I'd say it mostly proves to confuse people. What I've talked about, and so I'll just mention this lightly as a suggestion, is to have like a big main story quest or an MSQ that will, optionally, this is something that players can opt to if they want. They can jump in and they can be taken through this fully guided tour of Azeroth from vanilla to every expansion, to a selection of zone stories, to a selection of dungeons, to even a selection of raids. So they'd be able to even play through what we see as the patch content, but they will see it as, this cohesive, 70, 80-hour experience, which sounds horrifying, right? For folks like us who might be like, oh man, don't make it like Final Fantasy 14 where we're forced to play through the storyline. In a way, I don't want that either, because I've had bad experiences with that. So what I'd like to see is, again, this optional experience that if people want to, they can group up and get a group together and like do some of these dungeons through this MSQ or these raids through this MSQ. But if not, this sort of main story experience ought to be entirely curated as if it's like an almost an offline game. So, and again, the aim here is to get a person used to, not the systems. I know that's a different argument to make. I totally get that. But this is something to get to hook someone into the story that is Warcraft. I can't think of any good way to do it that's not going to involve tremendous amounts of work in order to get people to dive into this world and experience these updated stories. It's the same stories, but it's going to be brought into the modern standard with voiceovers and like some cutscenes and whatnot, the whole shebang, to the point where even going through dungeons and raids, it's not going to feel like how you and I did it back in the day. It's going to be managed with, like, let's say if the person's solo, it's going to be managed with NPCs. The fights are going to be scripted a little bit differently, but largely the aim is to deliver this, very rich and compelling experience that'll make people want more. The next part that I think the World of Warcraft really needs in its next expansion, in this 20th anniversary thing, is, unlike Shadowlands, unlike Dragonflight, we need this kind of return to familiarity. You'll hear in discourse, it'll be like, oh, a return to Warcraft, or bring Warcraft back, or something like that. But I guess to try to, again, bloviate and be more specific, I feel like we've just gone away from, kind of that old feel of what Warcraft was, which was Horde and Alliance kind of getting at each other's throats, but then they throw their weapons down, or at least they stop hostilities because there's the big bad that's come over, and that formula is old. We've seen it so many times, it does get tired, and what I'd like to see is a kind of, I guess, this new existence of what is, this new definition of what is the Horde and what is the Alliance, because up until more recently, we've looked at these factions and they've been defined as an antagonist to the other thing. It's like the Horde can't exist without the Alliance, and I don't believe that's true. And I think that this time skip with Shadowlands and Dragonflight, with the factions not really being in the spotlight, it gives a chance to tell new story. It gives a chance for an update to see this Azeroth that has not had any major conflict and does not even have like this, this barely tenuous peace. Maybe everything's cool. Maybe the two factions are actually just straight up getting along. They're trading. They're otherwise doing fine. But what I think would be cool, this is just kind of an example, it'd be cool to have a kind of expansion story where it's not about stopping the war or winning the war or finishing the war, it's preventing war. We see in the real world, we see, not to try to get too close to things, but we see like these, these big powers that are, rivals. They're kind of adversarial, but they're not openly hostile in most cases. So if we can see something like, a plot where, let's say, some third party actor is trying to incite war between the two factions because of reasons not important, I feel like that would be something compelling. Not exactly the gore and the grit of war, but more like the threat of it, and the threat to peace, and we can kind of go along those themes. I feel like these factions can exist and have some cool story, and the story doesn't necessarily have to be, oh, they beat each other's ass. Something that a lot of players want, and I guess I want it too, I just don't know exactly how best to go about it, would be to have some sort of account level system to be announced at BlizzCon, to be implemented in 11.0, or even like a future patch in Dragonflight. I feel like it's coming. We've seen like little experiments here and there. We've seen a bit of the trading post. That's an account level system. We've seen the Time Rift weekly quest. That is an account level credit sort of system. I don't quite see a world where they're going to take all the old reputations from the past 20 years and, combine it into this kind of this weird thing. I feel like that I feel like that would threaten to erase some of the efforts that other people have put in, who have put like years and years into, hey, these are my five characters and they've done all these things. And this is exactly how I want my character to be built with this rep and this rep and this rep. And for all that to suddenly be squished together into oh, well, regardless of what they did, now they just have exalted with everybody. I don't feel like that's going to be a great way to handle it. But I do think that going forward, we're going to see something where, for the most part, if you do a certain thing on your character, that is going to be credited across all characters. But I don't think it's going to be as simple as like this one to one, you did it here and you don't have to do it anymore. I feel like that would take a bit too much away from the experience of having having an experience on one character and then having a kind of unique experience on another. So I feel like what would happen in a world of having more account wide things, more account level systems, is that there would need to be more unique things that give these alts of ours, these different characters, different and unique experiences. Now, again, just like with quests, this is going to be tremendous work, but I can envision something like, well, maybe this paladin of mine is going to have a certain experience, they're going to have a certain questing experience, but then this rogue is going to have a bit of a different story experience. They're going to have certain kinds of quests. They're going to have certain kinds of dialogue. They're going to have certain kinds of character interactions that are going to be unique to them. I feel like that is the kind of thing that ought to be the compelling reason for someone to roll an alt, and not, oh, well, if I have these three characters, then I'm going to be able to farm this holiday currency even faster. I just feel like there's something more valuable that can be grabbed from that. But what I don't want is something like Legion. I wouldn't want something where the main story is fragmented into 13 parts between the classes, or dozens of parts with regards to all the different races. I mean, that'd be cool, but it would be really frustrating too to feel like, oh, I have to play through that just to understand what's going on. That did feel frustrating for me during Legion. I don't want to see that again, but what I would want to see is just a unique story that is, I guess, kind of like a closed thing within that class itself. Tell a good class story, tell a good race story, something that I could jump into, not now, but years later, and be like, oh, that was a really cool thing that I had experienced, because it had nothing to do with like the main story that was going on at the time. Rewards in WoW have, for the most part, stayed the same. We have gear, which is fleeting. We have transmog. We have pets and mounts and titles and achievements. I think that's about it. And we need more. I don't feel like what we have is enough. And I think one of the big takeaways from Dragonflight is that people are just tired of old formulas, and people have been mostly identifying outdoor zone content as, oh, it's the same old thing. Whereas people who have done like raids and Mythic Plus and PvP, like they've been going through like those loops for quite a bit longer. And what they were trying to do in Dragonflight has been, I would say it's been cool, but people are finding that to be repetitive. I think that it's a bit more than that. I think it's the rewards themselves, the things that we get, not just the experience or how we get them, but the rewards that we're working towards. It's all the same stuff. We only have so many things to show off on our characters as we're walking down the street or standing on the mailbox doing our thing. And I feel like we need more things that allow players to express their accomplishments in the game. Now, of course, I've talked player housing to death, and that's the only time I'm going to use that phrase. And while I would love that, I think the team just needs to work on other things, other ways that players can express their accolades, their accomplishments, but feel kind of new, feel kind of refreshing. I've talked about this a little bit. I've talked about customizable mounts. Like imagine being able to not just farm, being able to farm for these like manuscripts and whatnot. I think that's been a fairly successful thing in Dragonflight, although it's been very surface. But imagine if each race could have its own like racial mount or class mount or whatever, but you can customize it, from colors to the armor it wears to, the shape of its faces to weapons that are hanging off of it, tabards and flags and other cool stuff. That would be like, it's still a mount, but it's a new way to express, the identity, the flavor, the character of a character. Okay, that sounded kind of silly. Other things like even like sound effects. Like, what if we were able to change like the sound effects of some of of some of our classes? Some people miss the old gunshots. Some people absolutely hate it. But you know, if the client, if the person is able to, alter that experience a little bit for themselves, I think that there's a value to that. I feel like being able to access new kinds of emotes, new kinds of dance animations, dance studio, new kinds of death animations, casting animations. If they can change the way that they walk, if undead, instead of doing their kind of like shambly walk, if they could stand upright, different ways to add add character to our character. I feel like that would be so valuable. Now, this last part, I don't really have any good ideas at all. I just hope that the WoW addresses the challenges of trying to get people to group together, trying to build connections that last longer than the quick pug that you're doing. Because despite what the WoW team has done with the pre-made group tool and the guild finder and communities, it's still really hard, or it still feels really hard to motivate people to want to create lasting relationships with each other. Now, of course, I don't think it's a good job to force people to build those connections, but I think some sort of incentive would help. I mean, I don't have the best perspective. Like, I'm someone who is kind of antisocial, but I also happen to run a guild. I've been running one for a long time, and I feel like if guild people had better tools or better incentives or just better perks to make it feel good to be part of a guild, but also not feel forced to be in one, whether it's a guild or a community or a small group, having those sorts of things to celebrate that sort of camaraderie, it would be cool. And I really think that, if nothing else, the WoW team should like just kind of open up the lines and really invite people to have these sorts of specific conversations and discussions or even debates with each other about what are some of the, what would help that front, if it's even needed. And if anything, if there are other ways to improve like the social dynamic in WoW, like they just need to do a lot more listening. And that's kind of it. I know I did talk way too much. Sorry about that. But those are like those are the 5 things that I hope that the WoW team really talks about during this BlizzCon. Let's see how wrong I am. If you don't mind, like the video, subscribe for more stuff, and I'll see you guys on the other side. Stay safe, stay healthy, and stay breezy.